want to raise the North American yacht building organization, I think that out of the, by way of comparison, out of the disasters of the Torrey Canyon, the Argo Merchant, the Amico Cadiz, and ultimately the Exxon Valdez, these are all things that made the world a better place ultimately. These are all led to legislation, the Maritime Oil Pollution Act, the Marpole Act.
Marpole Act, right.
Those things have changed the world. It's made the world waters materially cleaner. The yacht world has its own needs like that. They're currently not being represented. I mean, there's a titular affiliation with one person, but I'm talking about getting the yacht world fully integrated.
There's no real strong voice for the yachting industry.
Really. And the ISS is the only organization in the world that can actually serve that function. And so this committee has already got a member from Ocean Co. on it, for example. There's some big coming Rasmussen and others.
No, and again, it's international, and that's and there's no getting away from the fact it's a very international industry we enjoy.
Cleveringa is, of course, Burger Boat Company.
Love it.
But I think we're all on this planet. We're all doing our thing. But the Americans, I mean, I think it's 95% of the boats registered in the Cayman Islands are beneficially owned by Americans.
Yeah, it's still a dominant need. I was in a podcast with Rhea before the holidays, and she asked the question, Fort Lauderdale, Monaco, what's really the yachting capital of the world? And I didn't hesitate. It's like it's not even close. Fort Lauderdale. For sure, Southeast Florida, absolutely. You can stack whatever metrics you want. This is still the yachting capital of the world. And as such, we have a lot of influence. I love history, right? So go back to the days that I was doing business with Broward Marine. By the way, Ron Cleveringa and I met 30 years ago when I was up in Chicago, when I learned I was going to be a father for the first time. He was an engineer up in Sagatuck with Broward up north.
Yeah, out of town.
He was. I was doing projects with Kenny Dennison down here in Fort Lauderdale, and I remember walking into his office one day and being introduced to Richard Hine.
Yes,
now,
of course.
Those of us who know, Richard went on after spending a couple of years at Broward building some pretty cool boats, Pegasus, Britannia, there's a couple others that were notable. He started a group in Monaco, and of course that segued into Oceanco.
Yep.
And so
I remember meeting him for the first time up in a place called Blasterdam.
Oh, there you go.
But it's all those. They had run into some trouble. They had some serious cash flow problems, and my sort of way of approaching things is to say, "Tell me again what you think the problem is." Cash flow. I said, "Okay, operative word, cash. All right. So why don't we just get a bunch of cash and fly to Blasterdam, see if we can take care of the problem."
It's problem solved, right?
Problem solved.
There you go.
Because people have to feed their families.
Yeah.
Whether you're building boats in America or building boats in the Netherlands, there's a labor component and there's a people component. We got that. Yeah. The people component cannot be underestimated, and there's no better workforce in the world than the American workforce.
There you
go. When Sir Rolls, and I think there was a Sir Royce, and there were actually two people named Rolls and one named Royce, but their mantra was to their people, if you're not interested in being the best car mechanic in the world, you're in the wrong place.
Yeah, move on.
Because we're going to be building a car that there'll never be anything like it, and there still isn't.
Right.
You sit in a Rolls Royce, you're in a different world. You can sit in a Veyron or a Bugatti or some of these other things. They're nice. A Lamborghini, I recommend you buy one when you're young. Otherwise, you won't be able to get out of the damn thing once you're in it. They need a hoist. They need. You can make a lot of money. You need a personal hoist.
Make a little special car davit for the thing.
For people over 70, to get them hoisted out of there. But I think that the people factor, and you hear it all the time in the art world, and it's true. my best example of the people factor and what it will lead to the surge of wonderful yachts built in America is a fellow that I met one time who he was in from the cold. It was cold in South Florida. He was in this interior of this very nice home. There was a party going on outside. It was a seakeeper party. And I asked him what he did. He said he was a air conditioning repairman. I looked at his hands and I said, "When's the last time you turned the wrench on an air conditioner?" He said, "About 25 years ago, probably 30, maybe 30 years." And then he said, "Maybe 50 years. I can't remember." But he owned the largest air conditioning service business in America. And he told me his children are now running it, as
Cool.
it should be.
Yeah.
But he also said he loved yachting. And I said, "Do you have a yacht?" He says, "No, I charter."
See?
And I said, "What do you love about it?" He says, "The people." He said,
Yeah.
"I love being on board those yachts." You know, he said, "I just love the service. I love the attention. I love the expression of what I've created with my life. I'm happy about that." And, you know, I really just enjoy talking to those kids when they're not working. If I can get them to pause for a minute and they feel comfortable stopping for 10 minutes, they tell me their stories. He says, "I love it. It's yachting." He says, "That to me is yachting." He says, "There's nothing like it."
There is nothing like it.
Yeah.
And I would tell you that, I would tell any crew member that you have to understand that you are working for people who have, at some level, found significant success in their life. Rare opportunity to sit with somebody who is successful that may be willing to basically point you in some directions or give you a good model of how you can be successful. It's a unique opportunity that hopefully enough of these yachties take advantage of and you know get that feedback. It'd be good.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think back when when you're in your 20s and even in your teens, the world in many ways is crystal clear. I mean, it's you kind of know what your needs are and what your wants are. You really kind of know truly what your needs are and what your wants are. Now, probably the good news at that age is your parents are paying for it, but you do have this clarity of vision.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the great breakthroughs, when you talk to the people that said, I was working on this, you see, whether it's Steve Wozniak or Sergey Brin or Larry Page, they were kids. You look at Eric Schmidt and you say Google, but he actually grew up like the rest of us. He went to school, went to Princeton. He was a smart guy.
Yeah.
Then he went to graduate school. I don't remember whether it was Stanford or University of California, I don't know, but that's where he met Wendy, the lovely Wendy Schmidt.
Yeah.
But you say, well, you look at him now and you go Google Eric Schmidt, but when he started all that, he worked for 5 years without pay to create Google.
That's
with
a commitment.
Sergey Brin and Larry Page, and they were children. They were young children. They were not adults as we define them.
Well, it's funny the creative mind you have. I mean, take you back.
When you're not worried about mortgages and children and all those sort of things yet.
John Lennon and Paul McCartney were in their late teens and early 20s when they started hitting gold.
Did you know they all broke up? They were still in their 20s when they
Isn't that crazy?
band broke up.
Yeah. Wow. So before we wrap up, because I want to make sure there's a couple things that we touch on.
Okay.
That sacred trinity, that sacred triad.
What are the other two? Owners at the top.
Owners at the top. Well, I think they're all somewhat equal. Some owners might disagree with me, but
stool.
Like a three-legged stool. And arguably, we could put a fourth leg in there. I'll touch on that real quick too. Number 2, crew. I want to talk about crew. Number 3, shipyards. We've been talking about shipyards, and now you kind of understand why I have a special place in love for shipyards in my maritime industry career and want to lift them up any way I can. And then you could go down the path that the fourth, what might be exactly what we're doing right now, sitting in a maritime attorney's office, the maritime law insurance package piece that really these boats have to have in this day and age to have an industry that's healthy. And I say everything else is the fluffy stuff. And what I mean by the fluffy stuff, it's like you could almost take anything else out of there and it would be replaced by some other way. There'd be another pathway to get done what you want to get done.
Right.
You could still have an industry. There's some brokers out there going, hey, what about us? And it's like, hey, I'm a big advocate for good brokers doing a good job, but at the end of the day, you could do their job. If two yacht owners wanted conduct a transaction, they could come to your office and make that happen.
In that sense, you're right. So you're talking about three legs of the stool. So you got the owners, you got the crew.
Yep.
Who is the other?
And the shipyards.
And
the
yards.
Shipyards are the refit yards, the shipyards, and even the marina infrastructure that lets you dock the boats and keep the boats someplace safe. It's the real estate piece and the construction support piece of it. Again, if you don't have them, you don't have a fleet. Your owner's not going to get his next boat. The charter yacht's not going to stay in service because it just has to happen, and so they really need our respect and they need to be healthy, because if they're healthy, the rest of the industry is healthy. If they're sick, the industry's suffering.
I think you're right. I think it also, your vantage point, it's interesting because you have the ownership, crew, yards, very different roles in the same industry, all vitally important. One of my mantras is hopefully equally as valid, which is that without the crew, without the captains, specifically in the crew, because they talk to the owners.
That's right.
So if the captain, the crew's wonderful, but to me the most important group of people in the crew sector are the captains, obviously. They are, in fact, the masters. They are, in fact, the leaders. They're the compass of the whole dog and pony show. Everything goes back to the happiness of the owner is based on the captain. And the captain's job is to just deal with that crew in a way that winnow it down, build it up, train it up, whatever. That's a massive factor in the owner's enjoyment. But the other crew, the other thing I want to say that I disagree with you a little bit on, but this may just be which part of the elephant do you have your arm around,
Right.
Are you holding the tail or the trunk or the legs? The brokers. I think that the problem in the brokerage world is that the internet and things like the internet have made it possible for completely incompetent people to get business.
Yeah.
But that is often the beginning of the end. They can get business. They can go on the internet. They can flog that sucker and get. But then you get into the nightmare. Does the boat fit the owner? Mm-hmm. Does it fit the owner's needs? Does the draft fit his dock? Does the beam fit his channel? Does the way that the thing is configured fit his permissible uses or desired uses? Everything about the vessel should be reflecting the owner's desires and wishes, wants, lifestyle. And that's just, you really see a lot of bad brokers out there. I mean, I think that the ones that are committed in the industry, members of the International Yacht Brokers Association as a starting point, not the ending point, but a starting point, committed to excellence. It goes right back to the Rolls-Royce mantra. They really drill down on what they do for a living. They've always been that way. When you talk to a Stuart Larson or a Kevin Merrigan, who we all know and love, they are phenomenal brokers. They know. They not only answer all the questions that are asked, they pose all the questions that aren't asked, and then answer them.
Well, that's important. I'd throw Mark Elliott into that group too.
Mark Elliott would be another good example.
And full disclosure, Bob Saxon, Paul Flannery are friends of mine, going way back.
Oh, yeah.
And I have a lot of dear friends in the industry who are brokers, and you're absolutely right that the good brokers that are advocating for their client with the willingness to walk away from a deal if it's not right versus a deal at any cost. When I was doing management recently, we had a client that bought a boat. He thought it was perfect for the charter he wants to do, and it was not adequate. And the boat was sold to him with the knowledge that this client wanted to put this boat into charter, and there wasn't accommodations for crew sufficient to do the kinds of charter they wanted to do.
There you go.
And so now he's having to Band-Aid the boat together, and he's frustrated, and he's not able to get the full charter revenue he otherwise would if it was the right boat. And you just look at things like that, and you say, well, there's an example of a boat that needed to be sold, and somebody who wanted to buy a boat, and the two were brought together, and the buyer was convinced that he was buying what he needed, and it was a pretty boat,
That's what he thought.
What he thought. And some of these guys, as wealthy and successful as they are, they just don't know what they don't know, which is all right. Put me on Wall Street, I'd crash and burn in a second. I certainly don't know what I don't know. So different worlds.
There was a case that came to my office. Very clearly, the owner of the yacht was mad at the lawyer, the surveyor, and the broker.
Yeah.
And I told him, don't tell me any names, and then I'll decide if I can represent you. So he told me what his story was, is that he bought a boat. None of those three groups, lawyers, surveyors, brokers, had looked at these certificates. Well, the second 5-year survey was due in a year after he bought the boat. So now he's looking at several $1 million of expenditure that he's got to make if he wants to stay in class.
Yeah.
And he's mad. And he told me the name of the lawyer, the surveyors, and the brokers, and I said, I can't represent you. I know all three.
Well, that's part of the problem in this industry.
I like
It's
them.
so small.
They're good people.
Yeah. Well,
But the problem is they did not do their job very well in this particular case, and depending on what his view is, it could not be a happy experience for them.
Well, there you go. And I've had that same experience in yacht management where we've had owners taking delivery and there's a pre-purchase survey, and you look at the pre-purchase survey and certain things just weren't done because the check boxes weren't checked, and saved him $10,000-$15,000, and he spent six figures remediating things that could have and should have been picked up. That's a whole other podcast.
Right.
And
There's a lot to talk about.
There is so much to talk about. I love it. So there's one more thing I do want to talk about.
Okay.
You and I share a love and participation in the International SeaKeeper Society.
Right.
I got involved in that a number of years ago just because I knew people like Spinner, Dick Seiden Spinner, and yourself, and it was, to me, it was like perfect. I mean, here's some environmental and scientific initiatives that work, and you and I talked about this the other day. I'm very much an avid diver. I talked about my commercial diving. What people some know, some don't. I'm a very accomplished cave diver. I go stupid distances back inside the wet rocks in zero photon environments on DPV scooters and staged bottles, and have a lot of fun doing that. And I also go out in the ocean and mix a bunch of helium in my gas and go dive in deep wrecks and have a good time and get in decompression and all that kind of stuff. So my boat's named Surface Interval. That tells you everything you need to know, probably. So I have a passion for the ocean, and the SeaKeepers comes along, and the organization I was working with, Global Underwater Explorers, the only not-for-profit diving certification agency in the world. Founded in Gainesville, by the way. Jared Jablonski, Robert Carmichael was involved.
Wow.
Dr. Todd, don't do this, Rick. McKay, Kincaid. Kincaid, yeah. So
the Kincaid is from Gainesville.
Yeah. He went
know
to
that name from Gainesville.
Yeah. Well,
sure.
and so he now lives out in Reno, Nevada, of all places. But they started an organization called Project Baseline, and you and I talked about that.
Right.
And we're looking, and Project Baseline simply is, it's citizen science, citizen science. I'll just leave it at that, citizen science. Say that fast 3 times. Where anybody at all that dives, that wants to go in the water and participate, has the opportunity to do so. It's a very simple program. You go in the water, you document where you are and when you're there. You document some simple things like how deep you were, what the water temperature was, what the visibility looks like. Ideally, you have your GoPro. You take some photos, shoot a little video if you can.
Oh, yeah.
And that information gets uploaded to a database.
Speaking to your audience. Yeah.
No, that's all right.
That's true.
So what's that matter? Well, I've got 3 boys. They all dive. And when I started diving back in 1975,
Right.
I went down to a place called Lou Key in the Keys.
Right.
Wow, it was a tropical wonderland, just spectacular. My first impression was like, I just drifted into heaven. I was recently doing a survey working with Project Baseline, and we went there and we did video transits and we did photo documentation. Dr. Todd Kincaid was with us. Robert Carmichael was on board too. We were on board the Baseline Explorer, an OSV converted ship that we were diving off of. And it looked like a frickin' desert.
Really?
Now, it's horrible. The staghorn coral, the elkhorn coral gone, algae everywhere. There were still pretty fish, but not like it was. There were clouds of fish. It was just, but I took my son, Tristan, to Lou Key a couple of years ago. We're making our way over to the Dry Tortugas, and we stopped there for a day of diving. He came out of the water going, "Wow, Dad, it's beautiful." Like, wow, think about it. His perspective of that spot in the ocean, because he hadn't been there before and had no baseline to connect it to, was that, hey, it was pretty nice. My perception of the same spot was, it's a shit show. Wow, horrible.
Right.
It's a freaking desert. And so when we talk about what's happening in the oceans and how we turn things around, step 1 is awareness. How are we going to get people aware of what's happening? And Project Baseline is a simple way, very simple way to do it, where you can empower thousands, tens of thousands of people to get in the ocean and do that and start creating these comparisons. And of course, my intention is to try to bring it to the yachting industry. You teach crew how to do this. They reproduce themselves across multiple boats. So, and you showed some interest in, and Seakeepers has its own initiatives. You talked about Seabed 2030, and give us some insight on your views.
First of all, I think Project Baseline is the beauty of it is the simplicity of it, which you can take a shot of a given moment in time and a given place in time, perfect coordinates of horizontal and vertical, and also longitude and latitude and all
GPS
the above.
Numbers, yep.
All the above. So you get a perfect moment in time baseline of what you're dealing with. So I think that information is extremely valuable. You don't have to argue with the wackadoodles about whether this is happening or that's happening. You can say you can either believe this or you can believe your own lying eyes. It's just obvious.
Right.
But Seakeepers is a multi. I think it's like a lot of organizations. It's sort of the way you see it, and some of that is vision, and some of it is reality, and maybe some of everything in between. But I think that back in the vision of 1998 was different from the vision of 2024. I know that in 1998, the talk of Monaco was coral bleaching, and the talk of my clients, yacht owning clients, because I'd been, been around for a number of, in 1980, so, do the math, and it was great. Life was grand, and I was in Monaco, and life was great. But the scourge being discussed in 1998 was coral bleaching and what was causing it. And half the people in the group was thought the Earth was getting cold, and others thought the Earth was getting warm. And they were shocked that the people at the table on the aft deck having sundowners was not in agreement on exactly what was going on. So a decision was made to address this question, and the best way to start was to we created this thing called the SeaKeeper 1000 unit.
Right.
It looked like a small refrigerator, but it was really only about a foot by a foot and about maybe 2.5 feet tall. It was a big piece of machinery that had kind of off-the-shelf components and sensors. And so we collected by drilling a through hole on a yacht's
Everybody loves
side.
doing that, right?
Yeah. And having 2 through holes, one for intake and one for outtake or outpour. And yeah, it was absurd in a certain way. These things cost $39,000 a piece. But I think in our naivety, that didn't seem like a lot of money, and now it seems like even today it seems like a lot of money. But in those days, it was like, are you kidding me? I believe it is true because I was there when I was walking down the dock, and I heard it with my own 2 ears. But the irony of this story is I am told that Sylvia Earle does not remember this moment in time. It was magic. She was asked, how can we make seakeepers better? This was the year 2008.
Okay.
So this was 10 years in. This was also the year of the Great Collapse.
Oh, yeah.
And in March of 2009, that nadir reached its ultimate before it started rising. A lot of the Seakeeper Corps members had lost half of their wealth.
It hurts.
In just a matter of weeks.
Wow.
They weren't all of a sudden, they were not terribly interested in seakeepers. But, other people, Sylvia Earle naming one, answered my question with, stop collecting your own data. Let the scientists collect the data. You just give them the ride.
Exactly.
It was genius because it's like we're right in the middle of the yacht world.
Yeah.
It's like we have this global pasture of horses, and all you need to do is saddle up.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was the new orientation of seakeepers.
Brilliant.
It's ongoing. There's a success has 1,000 fathers, and failure's an orphan. So people have a lot of they have revisionist ways of thinking about life in the big city, and things are, there's a lot of beach cleanups. There's probably nothing more important that you can do in the world than clean up beaches. That's where the ocean meets the land, and that's where the garbage collects.
Yeah, that's right.
Every day I get up and I see something that I think I wish we could do that. I hope to get a initiative going inside Seakeepers. I wrote down the words just a moment ago, Project Baseline.
There you go.
Because I hope to not just hear about it, but to implement it. People are now searching for Amelia Earhart's airplane, spending millions and millions and millions of dollars, but the irony of that is that they keep raising garbage.
In the middle of the ocean,
That's
Pacific
right.
Ocean, a speck.
So I think that could be a story.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about, I think I'm going to call it the Amelia Earhart Garbage Collection Initiative. Yeah, so it turns out that her contribution to science will not be that she tried to make it around the world, be the female. She'll be the woman who lit the fire of collecting ocean garbage, and it shall be forever her legacy.
Well, now that would be a legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And so that's something we're working on. We're working on. And these are projects that are just beginning. These
Right.
are the nascent ideas that we now have to figure out how to implement them. The unreported illegal and illicit fishing.
Oh, goodness.
It's a scourge. Most of the world, now if you talk to a lot of the world scientists, including Sylvia Earle, she's total vegan. Don't eat seafood. Don't eat animal food. Don't eat land food. Eat
Plant-based.
Plant-based diet, vegetarian. Okay, fine. And I'm all on board with that, except that I know that the world's most of the protein available to the poorest people on the planet comes from the ocean. There's lots of places that don't have enough land to farm or not enough land to ranch, and that one place would be Monaco.
Right.
You don't have any cows in Monaco.
No.
No cornfields. You have rocks.
And pavement.
But you had a guy, Albert I, who had a vision. So you're going to have a little vision here. And so I think that sometimes when you embrace something, you actually make it better. We are involved in a project for growing stone crabs. It's a farming operation.
Yeah.
And sustainable farming. I think that you're not going to convince people to stop eating stone crabs. They're going to eat stone crabs. But this client of mine is growing stone crabs, and he grows them vastly faster than they grow in the wild, and safer, and they're healthier, and they multiply, and it's a wonderful product.
Right.
But I got a call only yesterday from a manufacturer of sunscreen in California. It's non-toxic. Sunscreen, that little sunscreen that people use, is totally toxic and kills on contact a lot of the little coral fish, the reef fish.
That's true.
And these are things that people like yourself would know because this is your world, but most of the world doesn't understand that the people slathering up in Rio right now.
They don't
most
care.
Of them
They're unaware.
They don't know.
It's not that they don't care. They're just right.
So there's a lot of these projects. When you say, what do Seakeepers do? We do stuff. Shark tagging, promote eating of lionfish.
Yeah, yum.
Testing. There's a study going on of sea slugs, which are these gelatinous-looking things that are they have all kinds of powers.
Yeah, and
they have regenerative powers. They regenerate. They communicate. If you slice a sea slug in half, separate the two pieces, and then move them like around, suddenly they'll
find each other. Crazy, isn't it?
And how do you do that?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's projects of regenerating limbs like stone crabs. How do they do that? Growing bivalves off if you could do, like one of my friends and clients, he's actually the son of Lawton Chiles, the great governor. The woman who did that painting is Rhea Chiles, his mother.
Oh, cool.
But Lawton Chiles was a great governor and great senator of the state of Florida, in my view. His son, Bud, has a project called All Clams on Deck. And All Clams on Deck, among other things, just understands that bivalves will purify 50 gallons of water every day.
That's right.
And you can grow bivalves off your dock. Every dock in Florida could have a oyster farm.
Yeah.
So all these things are just, there's 1,000 points of light, to quote George Bush.
Yeah.
And that's the approach as far as I'm concerned. It's if we can be helpful and we can figure out some answers, we just move forward. It's almost like a glacier. It'll destroy anything in its path, but you won't see it even moving.
There you go. Well, I would say that in some circles, International SeaKeeper Society is one of our industry's best kept secrets. And hopefully conversations like this will put a spotlight on it, and we will start seeing more awareness of what Seakeepers does. And then, it's an inclusive organization. You just have to, have an interest to be included.
Right.
And I managed to worm my way in a few years ago, and I'm so glad that I did. And it's something that I would tell anybody that's listening to this podcast right now. Google it, look it up, take a look at what International SeaKeepers Society does and is. And if you have the wherewithal to help fund it or donate a yacht to the organization, it's a great way the SeaKeeper Society creates revenue. Consider it. And yeah, Michael, I
Totally.
think this is just an opportunity to, again, hold up our industry and do what we need to do to make it a better, healthier industry.
It's a yacht-centric environmental organization that without yachts, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Our founders were yachtsmen, 6 yachtsmen. First one in the door was the great Alex Dreyfus.
How about that?
God rest his soul, who had 6 motor yachts. He was a wonderful yachtsman up in Palm Beach.
Right.
Number 2 guy in the door was Paul Allen, one of the greatest yachtsmen that ever lived. He
No.
had 3 motor yachts. And you could tell he was in love with yachting in so many different ways. He did so many things that were yacht related. He was a wonderful archaeologist. He just the archaeology of the ocean. He loved he loved exploring these. He found old ships that had sunk.
Isn't that great?
Military vessels that had sunk.
Yep.
He found old the straits between Tunisia and that part of Africa and Malta and that area is just littered with sunken vessels. It's a rough body of water. That's all that water goes through there, through that strait. And a lot of ships didn't make it in the old days. They're falling apart. They're overburdened. They're stowed. Overloaded.
They didn't have ISM compliance back then.
No, they didn't have plimsoll marks.
No, they didn't.
And so you go down there, and the seabed is just littered with urns and things that carry olive oil and all this, the material of the day,
That's so cool.
and the oil of the day. And that was a Paul Allen thing. He died at 65, way too early.
Way too early.
He was on a roll on so many different levels. I ran into a guy that told me that the Black Sea is probably going to prove to be the most fascinating place on planet Earth because it probably was the biblical scene of the Great Flood, and it was a valley full of people and civilizations. And when that isthmus broke, it filled up
Sediment and silt.
Sure, just like
Yep.
the isthmus between Gibraltar. Obviously, we all know that at some point that broke, and
Boom.
you got what we call the Mediterranean.
Yep.
But the Black Sea is so deep that the water is so cold at the bottom. I'm
Preserved.
told
Everything's
it's all preserved.
Yeah.
And it's all down there.
Yeah.
And at some point, probably not anytime real soon, but they're going to be people. I think yachtsmen are the great new, Magellan.
Yeah.
Da Gama,
They,
Christopher Columbus, all the great explorers. I'm sorry for the left, those of you who don't like Christopher Columbus. I'm
hey,
sorry.
he's real.
He's a real deal.
Yeah,
It's a real
absolutely.
deal. Yeah, but I mean, that's going to be I think a lot of yachtsmen are kind of doing that in a different way. They go where they want to go.
Yeah.
That's why Seabed 2030 is so important, because yachtsmen go where the hell they want to go.
Right. So
They
we
go
get
all
to
over.
map more of the seabed and see what's down there and see what it looks like and what the contours
No
are.
doubt.
And yeah, it's good stuff. Well, Michael, I'm going to wrap this up. Today is Valentine's Day, so happy Valentine's Day, my friend. Today is also the first day of the Miami International Boat Show.
Right. We will
I
be
started
attending.
coming to this show in 1978 with my dad. So
That's
do the
amazing.
math. I've been seeing this show for a long time. And tonight you and I are going to spend a little time with the SeaKeeper Society and a
Exactly
couple
right.
of people with the International Super Yacht Society and Moore and Company. And I
Exactly.
thank you for the
that.
invitation
Thank
to participate again with the event. So we'll have a good time this evening. And
It's nothing I like doing better than, having drinks with friends.
there you go. Well, we'll definitely have a toast together.
Good.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of Yachting USA. I am your host, Rick Thomas. We're sitting again with Michael Moore of Moore and Company. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and we'll tune in for future conversations. We're going to have a good time doing a deep dive into the wonderful world of yachting. And until we see each other again, I wish you all well. Good night.